Welcome to our video series to teach about small groups. If you missed last Friday's session, or if you simply want to recap and learn about what we are launching in Thames Valley Church, then these videos should be pretty helpful for you. In this video, which is the first video of the series, we're going to be talking about what is a small group. As many of you know, the theme this year is connection. We're learning about how to connect with God, connecting with each other, connecting with our own families and communities, as well as connecting to our calling. And as we are in the second segment of that theme, we're learning about connection with each other. And this was the time that the leadership team and Sonia and myself were really wanting to kick off small groups in the church. So it stems from this vision and that we've had as a leadership to be a church that really is closer, to really capture those close relationships that the Bible calls us to. What does the path to spiritual growth look like? Is it attending a class? Is it becoming a Bible study leader? All of those are perfectly fine things to do and to be. But when we look at what it means to be a disciple, a follower of Jesus, spiritual growth and our relationships with one another are two things that cannot be divorced from each other. If we're growing spiritually in our walk with God, it means we're also growing relationally in our walk with one another. Ultimately, it's in our love and service to others. How do we learn to go from broken, selfish people, which we all are by nature, to selfless, loving apprentices of Jesus? I believe it's by building intimate and deeper connection and community with our fellow Christians, as well as eventually with others. In today's opening session, we're going to explore what is a small group. How do you define success in a small group? Are small groups even biblical? Does a small group require a leader to function? And what are some practical considerations of being part of a small group? So let's start with the first question. What is a small group? To put it very simply, a small group is a band of disciples of Jesus helping each other to become everything God created them to be. A healthy small group is one where every member is committed to that goal. They are meeting frequently and they are balancing 5 biblical purposes, which we're going to come and explain very soon. How do you define success in a small group? What does a healthy Christian small group look like? To answer that question of what does a healthy small group look like, we need to start with the individual in the group. What is a healthy disciple of Jesus? How do you define what a disciple is? Here's a definition that I've come across recently that I've found very helpful and very clarifying for me. A disciple is someone who is being with Jesus, i.e. they're in relationship with God. They are becoming like Him. They're being changed by that relationship with God. And the third is they are doing as Jesus did. They're committed to the mission of Jesus. What did a group of disciples together, therefore, look like? And fortunately, the Bible gives us a very clear portrayal of that in the form of the early church in Acts chapter 2. And if we go up a little bit, we can see the verses in Acts 2. We go up a bit more. Acts 2, verse 42, it says, "They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved." The early church, as we read, were meeting in temple courts, which you could say are public and perhaps externally focused spaces, as well as meeting in their homes, more private, perhaps more internally focused, time to build the relationship between the disciples. What did they do? It's pretty clear from the scriptures that they practice 5 principles which we're going to learn for our own small groups. The first was fellowship, and you could say that their fellowship was very much around the table. They enjoyed eating, probably as much as I do. 2, they were devoted to learning and prayer. 3, they were meeting needs. 4, they were praising God. And 5, they were building relationships, or the technical term, which I don't often use, is evangelism. And it's in those 5 principles that we find a blueprint for a healthy small group. You know, when we start a small group, it's highly likely that it's not going to be balanced between those 5 principles. Chances are it's going to be mostly fellowship. And that's fine, because that's the start of building trust within a group. But eventually that small group has to find some balance and start to experience those 5 principles or purposes for it to function and become everything God, I believe, wants it to become, and for the people within it to be shaped and transformed to become everything God wants them to become. Success then becomes the lives within that small group being changed. Much like a child growing up, I have young children, and sometimes we put a little pencil mark on their heights in the kitchen, and you don't often notice a child growing in real time. It's not every day that you wake up and say, oh, you've grown today. But when you go and stand that child back against that mark, you realize that they've grown. So too with our spiritual journey, we don't often realize in real time that we're changing. But when we look back to where we were, we see the ways that God is shaping our hearts to become more patient, to become more compassionate, to become more engaged in God's work, to become more sacrificial, more loving. Those are some of the marks of growing to be more Christ-like. Are small groups biblical? My argument is very simple, which is yes. Jesus had a small group. Jesus went into a period of fasting at the very beginning of his ministry for 40 days. And when he came out of that time of solitude, he started by building a small group. He went to his disciples and said, I'm going to make you into fishers of men. And he started with a group of 12. But even within that 12, he had an inner circle of 3, Peter, James, and John. As we just saw in the early church, it says that they were meeting together in their homes. It's quite likely that they were small groups around a table. It's clear that they were together, that they knew each other's needs, that they did real life being their real selves. Does a small group require a leader to function? Given that a small group is there to promote intimate and deep relationships, I think the title of a leader can be quite intimidating, and it can often create division between a leader and a follower. I don't think a small group requires a leader, but I do think that small groups require hosts or facilitators. And it's the host's goal to make sure as much as possible that the small group does not become just an information session, where one person is disseminating information to this person, to that person, to that person, and then they all go home. It's the host's goal, as much as possible, to encourage and stimulate conversation and discussion between all members. And it's in that conversation that we get to know one another, that we get to share our hearts, that we build closer relationship, that we know each other's needs, that we can keep each other accountable in a healthy way, and that we can call one another to be like Christ. It's the host's responsibility to build a safe environment for people to be vulnerable and to share, and to make sure that confidentiality is kept. And we're going to share a bit more about that. It's everyone's responsibility to make sure confidentiality is kept, but it's really the host is particularly paying attention to some of those considerations. We're now going to shift over to Joan, who's going to share some practical points about being in a small group. But before I end, I just want to share 2 practicals. Find a place that works for your small group, and find a rhythm that works for your small group. A place that you guys can all meet conveniently. I know in our church we're quite spread out. Find a place that works, but also find a rhythm. You know, the more frequent, the better. If your small group only meets once a month, it's going to be a catch-up session. If it meets twice a month and someone doesn't meet once that one time a month because they're away, then they end up only meeting once a month and it becomes a catch-up session. Try to figure out a rhythm, ideally, that can be weekly, that perhaps you can alternate between online and in person so that you have the frequency without maybe the practical consideration of travel, but find a rhythm that works so that it's consistent. Those are two things there. I'm going to hand over to Joan now, and we're going to go back to her speaking on Friday night, and she's going to share what she shared then about practicals.
Really just with some thoughts and reflections from really quite a different angle, but hopefully there's some relevance to what I bring. We are talking about very specific types of groups, but I have experienced group work outside the church community that has been immensely powerful. So what I'm going to be reflecting on, some things that, of course, they may not seem relevant, but on just really my experiences and on the power and effectiveness that I experienced with small groups, which was based on my experience as a facilitator or a host of several groups, helping people to get through their bereavement. So these were people coming together, they had no clue of anybody else, so they didn't know each other, but they needed help in their time of bereavement and wanted to heal and grow, and they would sign up to come to these groups, which, as you can imagine, could be incredibly daunting. Can you put next slide? Yeah. The power of human connection was just astounding to watch. The depth of sharing, the vulnerability, the way God has made people to help each other is absolutely inspirational. So that's where I'm coming from. These were groups that people were willingly signing up for, and I think that's something we have to acknowledge today. We're doing this as a church. I don't know all of you. Some of you be like, yeah, I've been waiting for this. Some of you might be like, I don't know what I feel. But so bear in mind, this was my experience where people were willingly coming to these groups. So there was definitely a visible healing and growth, and there were permanent relationships made after those limited 6 sessions. That's all it was. People were meeting weekly for 6 sessions and went away having become so vulnerable and so open and so helpful to one another that they ended up becoming great friends afterwards. Really important things to remember, and I just really I'm going to have to whiz through this because I know how valuable it is going to be for you to actually do the group work yourselves. A safe space, and this is really, really important. If people don't feel safe, quite frankly, they won't come. And I think that's something we have to bear in mind as well. We can't just assume, because we're doing it as Christians, it's all, just bring all of these things into your awareness when you're meeting. Power in just shared human experience. This happened to be grief, which you can't get more heavy than that, really. But the power in just meeting somebody else who was in that same space in their head. People would go away and go, I thought I was literally going crazy, but I realize now I'm just grieving. It was incredible. Reassurance. It's so reassuring, isn't it? When you meet somebody else and they get what you're going through, they get what you're feeling. Really powerful. We seek, I saw people seek answers from one another. Well, what do you do when that happens? Where do you go? Oh, well, have you tried this? We provide answers for one another. Obviously, we've got the Bible, and that is providing the answers. I'm not at any point saying, this is all based on sort of human decision, but these were really valuable things that I saw. And people had lost someone, but you can imagine there's a variety of ways in which people can die. So their experiences were very different, but still able to connect and benefit. Also, just bear this in mind, even in our small groups, if groups are really, really safe, it should be a place where, and this again was something I witnessed, where people couldn't talk to their families because everybody was grieving, or the family dynamic wasn't good, so they needed to come somewhere else. So bear in mind that this safe space can be where even in our groups, people can share something that is deeply personal and maybe something that they can't share with their own families. And another advantage, which actually can be a disadvantage as well, is that other people's opinions or points of view may be similar, which may feel great, but actually they might be different, and that could be great as well. So it's perspective. But there can be disadvantages, and I think this is, again, something that, we have to face. That, for instance, some people find groups overwhelming. Some people find just social communication of any sort overwhelming. And I think, if our groups are going to be safe spaces, please, let's each one of us bear this in mind. Be on the lookout for those that maybe are not so comfortable in a group setting. Some people are more reserved. They might come along, but they might not contribute. So be aware, and you don't want a situation where perhaps one or two people are going to be constantly in your group, but not really part of it. These groups that I was with, they obviously got very heavy. But I suspect sometimes ours will too. I'm sure they'll be very joyful, but if they're going to be meaningful, they're going to be joyful, but sometimes they may get quite heavy. And some people can go away and it can compound their own problems. So again, just being aware that they can feel burdensome. You might have people that don't actually get on with each other in the group. Let's be honest, okay? I think it's just being honest. And this did happen. I noticed it with these strangers that came together. You could see the person that was like rolling their eyes at the other person. And okay, we hopefully will not be doing that. But we are all human beings and we need to be aware of these things and we need to be aware to know how to handle them. And as I've said, this idea of our points of view being the same or different can also be a disadvantage. Anyway, some practicals as we rush along. The group size we generally found in these bereavement groups that, a group could be 3, but 3 is a very awkward number. 4 is probably better, but ideally between 6 and 10, but that's flexible. I'd say going over 10, it is starting to become almost like 2 separate groups. Obviously the location, the timing, we need to be organised as people. This was something that, obviously when we were doing them as part of the charity, we had to be really on it. Absolutely everybody knows what's going on when. Walking group. Now this is something that a lot of people enjoyed. The group would go out walking and talking. Because, some people, again, when you're eyeballing each other across the table, sometimes just walking alongside actually allows you to be free about what you're feeling. Definitely be prepared as we are. TJ's just given us some really great insights into what is this about, so we're not just going in expecting some sort of knees up. As a group, set your aims, set your goals, set a sort of a framework as a group, and everybody get involved in that. It's not going to be the host decides. It's so important. That was something that we saw, that's part of how people get together, is by deciding we're going to decide these things together. It's not going to be one person deciding it for us. So these group boundaries, what is something that is acceptable, what is not acceptable. This is something you could discuss as a group. I don't know what those things might be. I've got some ideas later on. But all of the decisions, the group becomes more important than any individual. And commitment. Obviously, again, we don't want to become, legalistic. But if it's got to work as a group, everybody's got to be committed to it in some way. Obviously, people get sick. We did have times when people couldn't turn up at the bereavement group. It wasn't like, you can't come back. But they knew from the beginning that, look, in order for this to work, we've all got to really buy into it. Important considerations. Mutual respect is up there, number 1. We have to have a mutual respect for each other, as God would expect. And this may mean, and I'm just going to run through this list, if you're having a discussion, making sure there's equal, what I call airspace. Some of us are more dominant and like to talk. we need to be on the lookout for that. Don't be sensitive to one another. And as a facilitator, it could get quite awkward having to try to stop one person speaking to let the other person who you could see is feeling something but hasn't had a chance to speak. As a group, particularly over spiritual issues, I think, we've got to be a bit careful to not say we when actually we're talking about our own personal opinion. So just be sensitive and aware of that. And perhaps avoid, what somebody should or shouldn't do, which could be a little bit awkward. Mobile phone use. Now, we're sitting in a classroom, and again, I don't want it to sound like, everybody puts their mobile phones in a box, but as a group, decide. Because, in today's society, people find it okay. I'm just going to look at my messages. But the group dynamic will change. If somebody's disengaged and looking at messages, obviously, if there's an emergency, but again, if there's an understanding in the group, then people won't, because we're human, get an attitude. Confidentiality. This is one that we couldn't stress enough, obviously, in our bereavement groups, that what is discussed in the group stays within the group. You don't leave the group and then go, how was your group? Oh, ours was great. Oh, you know what? Joan shared, bleh. You just don't do that. We really need to respect each other's stories, whatever they are. Having said that, there are limits to confidentiality. So none of us are above sharing something that might scare somebody else, something that just alerts you to something. We really do have to use wisdom. And I think sometimes, because as spiritual people, we obviously trust God. In the past, the church has sometimes made mistakes with this sort of thing and tried to keep things, not this church, churches can make the mistake, of keeping it in church. Sometimes that isn't really what I believe is the godly thing to do. And we definitely, obviously as our charity working with bereavement people, we knew these are the limits and you don't deal with that anymore just within your group. Avoid the cliques within the group. That can happen as well. People start to couple up and become best friends. Allow for creativity. People like different stuff. So your group might be a discussion, but it might be something different. It can still come under evangelism or fellowship or whatever. Be open to other people's ideas. These issues of confidentiality, respect, these are really fundamental to people actually feeling they can bear their souls. So very, very important. Also, think about how are you going to manage somebody who is distressed or emotional in your group. It's very easy to go, oh, they're there, it'll all be fine. Pass the tissues and get them to stop crying. You know what? That isn't going to actually create depth and connection. And that's what we want, is connection. So think about these things. That's all I'm asking, is to consider these things. Managing disclosures. We're sinful people, we're weak people. Somebody might say something and it's like a bomb being dropped in the room. Bear in mind, what are you going to do? Is everybody going to respond? Are we going to panic? Just be aware. And managing conflict. Let's hope there won't be any. Everybody's lovely in here, but how might you manage a scenario which perhaps doesn't get into a fist fight, hopefully, but feels a little bit uncomfortable and conflictual. And very, very quickly, finally, listening, as TJ said.
When you're ready. Thank you, Joan, for that. Unfortunately, the very ending of her message or speech was cut off due to a microphone issue, so I'm just going to go through her last slide about listening. There's a great quote by Dietrich Bonhoeffer that says this: "The first service that one owes to others in the fellowship consists in listening to them. Just as love to God begins with listening to his word, so the beginning of love for the brethren is learning to listen to them. It is God's love for us that he not only gives us his word, but also lends us his ear. So it is his work that we do for our brother when we learn to listen to him." Christians, especially ministers, so often think that they must always contribute something when they are in the company of others. It's that this is the one service that they have to render. They forget that listening can be a greater service than speaking. And that's a quote by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. A few practical points about listening. Listening provides support as well as helps to manage the group. Listening is as important as sharing to fuel connection or empathy and to understand one another and feel safe. There's different types of listening, and Joan went through a few different examples. There's active listening, which is your whole body and especially your ears. It's showing through your body language that you are engaged and listening. There's reflective listening, facts and feelings to demonstrate you've heard or understood. Sometimes you can clarify or summarize if you're not sure what the person was saying. So if you hear something, you can say, what I heard was this. Is that what you mean? And you sort of summarize back to them what they're sharing. That's a type of listening. Acknowledge others and bring them into the discussion. Perhaps we realize that someone else hasn't been heard or listened to, and we try and engage them into the discussion. And we are aware of limitations of the group. So a point here that Joan made, which I think is important, is things to do with mental health, perhaps anxiety issues, depression issues, and just knowing and being able to flag when that might be something that you need to be aware of, to be mindful of, perhaps to have a conversation with that person and ask a few more questions to understand. And obviously there's people in the church you can go to. Joan is one of them. My wife Sonia is one of them. And there are more that are in training right now as well as counselors. So as a church, we're also growing to understand mental health more deeply. So that's kind of a few points on listening. That is actually our first session on small groups training. And we're going to do our next session on to know and to be known. And so hopefully you found this opening session helpful. And we had discussions in small groups. And so go away and discuss in your small group, what is your hope for a small group? What do you hope to see in your small group? What do you not want it to be? And have a discussion if you haven't had the chance to already. And we're going to close there. Thanks, everyone.